Good day, I'm David Scaer, Concordia Theological Seminary, Fort Wayne, Indiana. Our gospel for the 19th Sunday in Pentecost is Mark chapter 9, 14 through 29. And because it is long and it has a number of complexities in it, I'm going to read it first in English. And when they came to the disciples, they saw a great crowd about them, and the scribes arguing with them. And immediately all the crowd, when they saw him, were greatly amazed and ran up to him and greeted him. And he asked them, "What are you discussing with them?" And one of the crowd answered him, "Teacher, I brought my son to you, for he has a dumb spirit, and wherever it seizes him, it dashes him down, and he foams and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. And I asked your disciples to cast it out, and they were not able." And he answered them, "O faithless generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring him to me." And when they brought the boy to Jesus, and when the spirit saw him, immediately it convulsed the boy, and he fell on the ground and rolled about, foaming at the mouth. And Jesus asked his father, "How long has he had this?" And he said, "From childhood, and has often cast him into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have pity upon us and help us." And Jesus said to him, "If you can, all things are possible to him who believes." Immediately the father of the child cried out and said, "I believe, help my unbelief." And when Jesus saw that a crowd came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "You dumb and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." And after crying out and convulsing him terribly, it came out, and the boy was like a corpse, so that most of them said, "He is dead." Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up. And he arose, and when he entered the house, his disciples asked him privately, "Why could we not cast it out?" And he said to them, "This kind cannot be driven out by anything but prayer." In working through a gospel in preparation for preaching, I make it a habit to have a synopsis in front of me, which is in the Greek text, and also an ordinary Greek Bible. And I do this for this reason, because the Gospels themselves are forms of preaching. And I am absolutely fascinated by the differences that one finds in the Gospels when this is done by comparison. Now, this particular volume that I was using, it was done by Bernard Orchard, now deceased, a Benedictine monk, and I knew him. This is out of print. I suppose you can get it on Amazon, but I have an idea with all the mechanisms we have today, you could actually make yourself a hard copy. And I say this for this reason, because this account of the healing of the deaf boy is found in all three Gospels. And what is every evangelist is a preacher. I'm not so sure that really comes out in the way we look at the Gospels. And every preacher, there is no one way to preach. I always have a difficulty in judging a sermon, because each of us preaches according to the way we think and how we express ourselves. One fellow was a student, had a degree in speech, thought that homiletics ought to be taught by developing the ability of each student or each pastor according to the way he proposes things. Well, each evangelist has his own. He has his own thing he wants to get across. They don't think exactly the same. So if you look at the synopsis where you have the Gospels side by side. Over here, where my hand is, that's Matthew. In the middle is Luke, and over here is Mark. And what is striking is that Mark is the longest of the three Gospels. Now, this is counter to the common accepted opinion. It's not just, it is the majority opinion, that Mark is because it is the shortest Gospel, it is the oldest Gospel. Well, pericope for pericope, it's not that way at all. This pericope, along with other pericopes in Mark, it's longer than it is in Matthew and Luke. So one gets the impression, just by reading this account, and we read the account in the English because it is so detailed, that the person who is writing this has access to information about how this event really happened. There's some intriguing details in that. Now, this particular gospel of the healing of the demon-possessed boy follows the transfiguration. If so far as the deity of Jesus is concerned, if we wanted to pick out one moment in his life in which his deity became obvious, it would be the transfiguration. Not even the Easter accounts match the brilliance of the transfiguration. This is the way Jesus is as God. It's sort of like going to a church service or a chapel service and being elevated by the music, by the liturgy, by the entire service, the lights maybe, the candles. And you want to say with Peter, Lord, it's good to be here. Well, the next count that follows, and it was deliberate on the part of the evangelists, and I believe it's probably Matthew who put it there, you have to come down to real life. Because this is an absolutely, well, this gets down into the gutter. You go from the deification of Jesus, his appearance of himself as God in the transfiguration, and what are you dealing with? You're not just dealing with Satan, a demon-possessed boy, but you are dealing not just with a deaf boy, I should say, but someone who is under the influence of Satan. And this does not come out that clearly in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke. So if you are following along, and as I said, in front of me I have the synopsis, I have an English Bible, and I also have a Greek text to the right. And there's a reason for that, and that is Mark has a gospel, has a vocabulary that does not always match in every instance the vocabulary of Matthew and Luke. And how does Mark know so much about this story? It's unlikely that he was there. However, if Peter is behind the Gospel of Mark, at least the way I envision it, Peter is preaching in Rome, and at least the Gospel of Matthew, and I would say also the Gospel of Luke, is available to him. And after the Gospel is read, Peter gets up and he preaches. And from the early church tradition, from about the year 100, 150, it was said that as Peter was preaching, somebody in the congregation suggested to Mark that somebody should take this down and take down the notes. And so he does. And there's a vibrancy. When you're recalling a past event and someone is present who was also involved in that past event, it's very likely he's going to say, or she's going to say, you're not telling the whole story. There's more to this story than, and it is. This lesson, this occasion, is relatively flat in the Gospel of Matthew. Maybe a little bit more lively in Luke, but certainly does not match the vividness and the vivaciousness of the Gospel of Mark. And in verse 14, it starts this way, and they coming to the disciples saw a great crowd with them, and they were in discussion with the scribes. Now, maybe you already caught that. It says they coming down, okay, they, and it says that they are going to speak to the disciples. Well, this sets a division between the disciples. Peter, James, and John are with Jesus. Some of the disciples are left behind, the other 9. They get into a discussion with the crowds, and when Jesus appears, this is so lively. This is so lively. When Jesus appears with the 3 disciples, everybody wants to say hello to him. When there's maybe you notice this in church conventions, but when the president of the synod and another high official comes in, everybody wants to say hello to him and shake his hand. And that's what the situation is here. Now, why is the crowd gathered together? The crowd is gathered together because now you don't get this in the other Gospels. There's apparently the discussion between the disciples and the crowd, the 9 disciples and the crowd. The discussion has to do with this boy who is demon-possessed. And he is suffering miserably. This boy is suffering miserably. He cannot speak. He cannot hear. He falls all over the place. He foams at the mouth. You know, here we get down to the reality of what it means to be a pastor. And sometimes the unfortunate, those who teach in institutions or who carry out their occupations in institutions don't always see the reality that the people have to face, because there are families that have children who are possessed or who have difficulties. Yesterday, I went over to the Canterbury Green for a swim. It's very hot here in Fort Wayne, and a young lady, I couldn't tell her age, whether she was 15 or 25. She jumped into the pool, and her caregiver, and apparently she was assigned, a paid caregiver, had to coax her out of the pool. There are people who do not operate on an ordinary level. And these people are like that from birth. And they need special attention. Now, we're not going to say that the young man the boy in this particular story is demon possessed. That no way does this indicate that the people who have these extraordinary problems, personality problems, are demon possessed. But it does indicate, and I think this has to be said in preaching, it does indicate the influence of sorrow and Satan in the lives of the people. And I think it is something that has to be brought up in our preaching, so that the preaching just can't always exist on the transfiguration and concentrating on the resurrection. There are these horrible things that continue to happen. It says here he was not able to speak. I have an idea that he was able to make groans of some sort. He probably was not able to express his feelings. And it says here, by the way, that when the Father, in verse 22, it says, often he throws himself into the fire, into the water, so it destroys him. If you are able, have mercy on us, show mercy to us and have compassion. Now that is an amazing statement because it isn't the word eleison. It has the word of compassion. It's used of Jesus, it's used of God. It suggests the idea that you look at a terribly miserable situation, and whether you're a Christian or not, you have to feel compassion. I mean, certainly by going into the cancer ward of a children's hospital, this is the type of feelings we would all have. And so it's a plea to Jesus, you want to say to the humanity of God, that he would do something. Now, the situation, and here, by the way, Mark helps us understand exactly that's what's so marvelous about Mark. Why the other evangelists did not include these details, I don't know, but it's really the details that make the story. Now, the three disciples, Peter, James, and John, have got to see the glory of God. The other 9 are left down below. And being the representatives of Jesus, and that's what the apostles were, and that's what the word means, since they were the representatives of Jesus, they were going to exercise their authority, which they had, and this comes out in the ending, the second ending of Mark. They would cast out demons, and that is part of the apostolic commission that they would do this. That Jesus being away, they standing in his place, this would be a good time to make use of the authority which has been given them. And if they weren't on the inner circle of Jesus, at least they could at least have some authority and at least take some prominent place in the kingdom of God. And they didn't do this in a private way. This man comes up from a crowd. He's in a crowd of people who want to see Jesus. And it says they greet Jesus. That isn't told in the other Gospels. And this man, some way or another, pushes himself to the front. And he has to push himself. There are times when waiting your turn in line just is inappropriate. And this was a time. And he gets a hold of Jesus here. And he dominates the rest of the conversation. And there's an explanation there that he has spoken to the disciples of Jesus to get something done. And it says here, by the way, in verse 18, they were not able to do it. Basically in Greek, they were not able to do it. And then comes the condemnation of Jesus. Faithless generation. Generation without faith. Now, I wouldn't put this under the category of law and gospel. These are people, the disciples are Christians. They are believers, but they really don't believe. See, the problem here is and it'll come out at the end of this gospel. If they really believed, if they really had the conviction of what they were doing, they would have aligned themselves with God and with Jesus by prayer. But this they were not able to do. This kind of pericope presents an opportunity in preaching to get very graphic about the problems that people confront. If there is one issue that sometimes we preachers are held accountable for by the people, is that we speak in theological terms and we do not necessarily relate to life. Relating to life, losing your pension. Related to life, a Down syndrome child. Related to life, a child who was born a paraplegic. Where we spend some of the time in the summer up in the Pocono Mountains, there's a Catholic institution which is very close to my heart that cares for people who are not physically and mentally fully developed. And the local weather guy, Joe Snedeker, who's a favorite of mine because he is so extraordinary and unusual, he makes the weather report very interesting. He, every summer, he takes a bicycle trip for about 500 miles in various directions to raise money for St. Joe's. I have to put in the bucks. And you have to admire, we have the Bethesda Institute. We Lutherans have that. Showing mercy to people who in no way can ever recompense. And the great thing that there are people in our churches who devote their, Mother Teresa, for example. There are people who devote their lives totally to those people who can never return the favor. And here I think, here in this particular pericope of this terribly afflicted boy, we have the motivation or the groundwork for such work. And I think we have to be quite specific in our preaching that we do want people to toss in the dollars for these kind of programs. I toss it into this Catholic institution because they show the pictures of these people. What can you do? And we do it for Bethesda too, and that's what we should do in our churches. There is suffering all around. And this raises the question too of why is it that the miracles stopped? Well, I know there are a few in the book of Acts, but they're not too many. Why did the miracles of Jesus stop? And these extraordinary events where things are total, and they can still happen today. And that is by the kindnesses we show to those people who are under terrible afflictions. All afflictions come from Satan. God supervises them, but they all come from the fall into sin. We continue to do the miraculous work of Jesus in this way. That's why in James it says, what is the true religion? To visit the widows and the orphans in their affliction. Yes. Now, what struck me in this story, it is a story about faith too. But before we do that, take a look at verse 21. If you're working along in the Greek, you can see it. Jesus asked, how long have you had the problem? How much chronos, how much time? And he answered, from paidiothem. Now you'll recognize the word paidion, child, from the time he was born. I had an opportunity to engage in a symposium on infant baptism. And there was a Baptist there, Reformed, Catholic, and so forth. And that's always a question where we Lutherans stand out on this, on original sin. They have some of these other religions, Christian groups, have something resembling original sin, but nothing like what the Lutherans have, which sin is so absolute. It says from childhood. And that is, sin does not afflict us first as we mature. As we get older, we probably are worse sinners. I can attest to that. But it says, from the time he was born, he was Satan's target. As soon as a child is born, he's Satan's topic. And this brings us also to the question of when should we get our children baptized? The Reformed will say, we'll do it on a Sunday if I'm around. The Catholics are pushing it back too. The Greek Orthodox will say 40 days. However, what the church has to offer in baptism should be given to those who are under affliction from the very time they are born. They are conceived. And this is also then comes to be a dissertation. It's very hard to find, I shouldn't say that, it's they're not that numerous. References to faith are not that numerous in the Gospels. We have Romans and Ephesians, Galatians, and so forth. And Jesus said, well, the answer to this, the answer to the man's problem is this. If you are able to believe, because all things are possible, are all things possible to the believer? Now, here's where we don't have the Greek on the board. You have it in front of you. It says, the father of the boy, the hapater tu paidiou, he kraxis. He cried out. This is the same it's the same word that's used for Jesus in the crucifixion when he cries out to God. This is a complete emotional release. He doesn't think of what prayer he's going to say. He just lets it all hang out, and he lets it all hang out at the same time. Now, the variation in the text in verse 24 adds the words with tears. Just from a maybe that belongs in the original manuscript. I do not know. I don't think so. Because for this reason, if we knew we were sitting in an airplane and the thing was going down, or in a boat and there was catastrophe on the way, it's not tears that come to our things. It's the desire to get me out of here as quickly, help, because I'm going to be destroyed. And then comes the great thing. I believe, have mercy on me. He cried, I believe. He cried out, he said, help my unbelief. This is not an example of law and gospel. This is an example of true faith, of a person who totally relies on the person of Jesus in order to get him out of his dilemma. It's totally magnificent. Help my unbelief. And he's asking Jesus to come. There's two parts in all of our existence. The one thing great about being a Lutheran is that we fit, our theology fits the reality in which people find themselves in, and that is we find ourselves between belief and unbelief. We never get rid of unbelief. Unbelief is part of our existence as long as we live. We do not get better and better, and the Protestant, the evangelical denominations do that way. Help my unbelief. Preach the gospel to that part of me that does not accept you totally, that does not accept you. So far as my faith is concerned, I completely trust in you, but there's a part of me which is dragging me down. And so Jesus then admonished the unclean spirit. I wish I had I make sure I'm in the right column here, yes. Unclean is not found in Matthew. The unclean spirit, and the spirit who was deaf and unspeaking. That's what it says in verse 25. The word dumb is elalan, which means which doesn't speak and is deaf. I command you, come out of him and no more go into him. That's a magnificent absolution which Jesus gives. It's absolution it's the preaching of the gospel to the boy, and here is the breaking in of God's kingdom. Now, in this kind of a sermon, you have a lot of ways to go, and that is you might want to take up the question of demonic possession. A number of years ago, I would say 35 years ago, it became kind of fashionable demon possession. Became fashionable, so if a child was disobedient, the kid was demon possessed. And then the parents would use severe corporal punishment in order to do something. We have to be very careful about that. It doesn't say that the child was an unbeliever. The child, you see, Satan works in all the sons of disobedience. Wherever there is unbelief, there is Satan work. In the case of Judas, the personality of Judas as a person and the personality of Satan work side by side in cooperation in order to bring about the crucifixion of Jesus. This boy is not an unbeliever in the sense that he's done something so bad that he's demon-possessed. If there is a case where a person is demon-possessed, it's against his will. We can never suggest, in fact, it's wrong to suggest that if we had more faith, we wouldn't, this person or that person would not be demon-possessed. And then also the devil cries out eschatologically, shouting in leaving the young man, and it says here the boy was as if he were dead. That's really great. And many thought that he had actually died. I don't know if this would be a good opportunity for a sermon on that. Through Christ, we become entirely new creatures. He actually goes through the experience of being dead, so that the people said at the end of verse 26 that he had died. Jesus laid his hands on, grabbed his hand, and raised him up, and he stood up. That almost looks like that's if you look at it in the Greek, and you got to look at it in the Greek, it's so beautiful. It almost looks like the final resurrection of the dead. Jesus puts down his hand and he lifts the believer from his grave, and the last word in the Greek, anastei, is the word for he rose from the dead. Jesus took his hand and he raised him, which may say something in regard to the way we conduct our ministries, and that is some people are so clinically sensitive that they don't want to touch anybody, especially that they do not want to touch sick people. They keep themselves away. Yeah, and you can recognize these people. They're just absolutely too perfect. It says Jesus grabbed his hand and raised him. Now, if we're going to speak about a section with tears, this would be the section where we would have tears. That he just doesn't heal the guy. He doesn't just heal the boy. He helps him get up from his miserable condition. Could you imagine being in a situation where you are absolutely out of it and sick in bed, and Jesus would come and give him this and lift him up? Isn't this the act of mercy, that we actually get involved in the misery of other people? Only in Mark do you get this idea. I would suggest reading this to yourself aloud a couple of times to get the whole swing of it. See, reading the scriptures is sort of like music. It's sort of like dancing. You just can't know the notes. You got to hear it and get into the rhythm of it. And so it ends this way. You can come to it. The disciples are totally amazed. But they are polite and they keep their place. They do not ask Jesus this question publicly. I mean, there are other people who are watching this, the crowds, the scribes have watched this. They don't say to Jesus, hey, where did we drop the ball? They don't say that. They wait. It says they go into the house. There is something absolutely personal about that. That's why I so love Mark. And his disciples, they finally asked him the question, hey, Chief, how come you were able to do it and we were not able to do it? See, no, they asked him privately. One of the important things about going out on a vicarage is that the young men, or maybe not so young, but they're all novices, have an opportunity to ask the supervising pastor about how they succeeded or how they failed. It's important. The ministry is not an intellectual discipline. It is a personal discipline in dealing with people. And Jesus' answer in 29 is that says it's in 29. He says this is a special kind of a situation, and that is this only takes place by prayer and by fasting. Now, whether the word fasting is part, I'm going to check this out here. It doesn't appear that fasting is part of the original pericope. But it does do this, and that is the preaching of the gospel is simply not a mental or intellectual exercise. It involves as a preacher, involves our total being, and if we are hearing the word of God with our ears, we respond in a conversation with prayer so that our prayers correspond to the will of God. And I guess there are two ways to go on that one. I mean, in the Catholic monasteries, they're praying all the time. At least that's what some orders are devoted to. And then among the evangelicals, and we know of them, and we know them, and we've been with them, they continually to pray. Their prayers are very long. This is something, by the way, our ministries and our preaching have to be accompanied with prayer. And indeed, our prayers won't accomplish it. But in a way, the prayers do accomplish it, because God responds to our prayers. We Lutherans, we believe in the sovereignty of God, but not the absolute sovereignty of God, that he enjoys engaging in conversation with us, and unless we pray, it's only one way, and when we pray, it becomes part of us. Now, when it comes to preaching, some say, preach the whole text. Well, I disagree. There is so much in here. You got original sin. You got infant baptism. You have our place in the church as providing for the healing of other people. You have the pericope opens with a theological discussion. It closes with a dissertation on prayer. And it could very well be that the evangelist included this particular pericope because the church, in facing difficulties, had given up on prayer. And the other thing is, after spending some time out in the East this summer, I am convinced. I don't have to be convinced. It's overwhelming how secular the American culture and existence is. Now, secular in the sense that God becomes incidental. He's not part of the program anymore. But secular also includes the idea that we pay little attention to Satan. This gospel serves the Christus Victor theory of the atonement, which you will not find. You'll find it in Walther's hymns, but you won't find it in our dogmatics books. That the real, justification is between me and God, and I receive the absolution. But but at a higher level, there's a cosmic battle going on between God and Satan, and that's the overarching one. Well, that's going to be the end of our explanation for today, and I thank you for the time and the effort that you have devoted in listening to this, and I wish you all a good day, and I hope you have a good time preaching. Thank you.